Please, Mr. Keller. I know it's not much, but this van is everything to us. It's the only way I can take my daughter to her therapy appointments." The woman's voice cracked as she stood in the small garage, her 4-year-old daughter sitting quietly in a wheelchair beside her, clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. 33-year-old Beckett Keller looked up from under the hood of the ancient van, wiping grease-stained hands on his coveralls, his heart already breaking at what he knew he'd have to say. "Mrs. Davies, I wish I had better news," Beckett said gently, kneeling so he was eye level with the little girl, Poppy, her name tag read, decorated with hand-drawn butterflies. "The transmission's completely shot. It's not a quick fix, and the parts alone would cost more than the van's worth. I can try to patch it temporarily, but honestly, it won't last more than a few weeks." Mrs. Davies's face crumpled. She was young, maybe late 20s, with exhaustion written in every line of her face and clothes that had been washed too many times. "I don't have money for a new van. I'm barely keeping up with Poppy's medical expenses as it is. Her father left when she was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, and my family, they said caring for her was my choice, my problem." Beckett's jaw tightened. He thought of his own childhood, raised by a single mother after his father abandoned them, watching her work 3 jobs to keep them housed. He'd opened this garage 5 years ago, specifically to help people like Mrs. Davies, people the fancy dealerships ignored. "Give me a week," he said quietly. "I'll figure something out. I promise I won't leave you stranded." What Beckett didn't know was that across town, 33-year-old Vaughn Ashcroft was having the worst argument of his life with his parents. Vaughn had inherited billions from his grandfather's industrial empire, but his parents, cold, status-obsessed people who measured worth exclusively in dollars, had always controlled the family's charitable foundation, using it primarily for tax benefits and social climbing. "You want to redirect foundation funds to what?" his mother said icily. "Community programs for disabled children? Vaughn, that's not where people like us invest. There's no return, no prestige." "It's not supposed to have a return," Vaughn said, exhausted by this familiar battle. "It's supposed to help people who need it. Isn't that the entire point of charity?" "The point of charity," his father said coldly, "is strategic positioning. You're being naive and sentimental. It's embarrassing." Vaughn left their mansion feeling hollowed out, driving aimlessly through parts of the city he rarely saw, working-class neighborhoods where people struggled for things his parents threw away without thinking. His Bentley felt obscene on these streets. When his car started making an alarming grinding noise, Vaughn pulled into the first garage he saw, Keller's Auto Repair, a modest shop with peeling paint but meticulous organization visible through the open bay door. Beckett looked up from Mrs. Davies's van as an absurdly expensive car pulled in, and a man in a tailored suit stepped out, looking simultaneously uncomfortable and lost. Great, Beckett thought. Probably someone who'd lecture him about proper torque specifications, knowing nothing about actual mechanics. "Can I help you?" Beckett asked, trying to keep judgment from his voice. "Something's wrong with the transmission," Vaughn said. "It's making a grinding sound when I shift." Beckett spent the next hour diagnosing the issue, a relatively simple fix that any dealership would have charged thousands for. As he worked, Poppy wheeled herself over in her small chair, watching with quiet fascination. "What are you doing?" she asked Vaughn, who had been awkwardly standing to the side. "Just waiting," Vaughn said, then unsure how to talk to a child. "What's your name?" "Poppy. I'm 4. I can't walk, but I can draw really good pictures. Want to see?" Before Vaughn could answer, she'd pulled out a crumpled paper covered in crayon flowers. They were actually quite good, detailed and full of color. Vaughn found himself genuinely impressed. "These are beautiful," he said, and meant it. "Mommy says beauty is everywhere if you look right, even in broken things." The simple wisdom hit Vaughn unexpectedly hard. He watched Beckett work, the careful attention, the obvious pride in doing the job properly, the gentle way he'd spoken to Mrs. Davies earlier. This mechanic, covered in grease in a run-down garage, seemed to have more purpose than Vaughn had ever felt in his climate-controlled boardrooms. When Beckett finished, he quoted a fair price. Vaughn paid, then surprised himself by asking, "That van over there, the woman with the little girl, what's wrong with it?" Beckett hesitated, professional discretion warring with the exhaustion of carrying other people's problems. "Needs a new transmission. She can't afford it, and I can't afford to do it for free, much as I'd like to. I'm trying to figure out a solution." Vaughn made a decision that would have horrified his parents. "What if I paid for it? The repairs, I mean." Beckett's eyes narrowed. "Why would you do that?"
"Because I can," Vaughn said simply, "and because maybe doing something that actually matters will feel better than another investment portfolio that just makes rich people richer." Over the next week, something unexpected happened. Vaughn kept coming back to the garage, ostensibly to check on his car, but really because he found something rare: authenticity. Beckett treated him like a regular person, not a wallet or a networking opportunity. And Poppy's joy at seeing Mr. Vaughn was the purest happiness he'd ever inspired in anyone. Beckett learned that Vaughn wasn't just another rich guy. He was someone genuinely trying to figure out how to use his resources meaningfully while fighting a family that valued wealth over humanity. And Vaughn learned that Beckett had been quietly helping dozens of families like Mrs. Davies, extending credit he couldn't afford, doing free repairs, slowly drowning in his own kindness. Then Vaughn's parents discovered what he'd been doing. They showed up at the garage one afternoon with a lawyer and an offer that made Beckett's blood run cold. "Mr. Keller," Vaughn's father said, placing a check on the workbench. $1 million. In exchange, you will cease all contact with our son, refuse any further financial assistance from him, and sign a non-disclosure agreement about this entire situation. Beckett stared at the check, at more money than he'd see in a lifetime of honest work. Money that could save his struggling business, help dozens of families, transform his life. Then he looked at Poppy, who was coloring in the corner, humming softly, completely trusting that the adults around her would protect her world. He thought about Mrs. Davies, who'd cried with relief when her van was fixed. He thought about Vaughn, who'd found something real in this grease-stained garage that his billions couldn't buy. "No," Beckett said, quietly, pushing the check back. "Excuse me," Vaughn's mother said, genuinely shocked that anyone would refuse. "Your son isn't a problem to be solved or a weakness to be managed," Beckett said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "He's trying to be a decent human being, which is apparently something you can't understand, and I won't take money to help you make him as empty as you are." The confrontation that followed was ugly, but Beckett stood firm. When Vaughn's parents finally left, threatening lawsuits and consequences, Vaughn turned to Beckett with tears in his eyes. "You just gave up $1 million for what? For me?" "Not just for you, for Poppy, for every kid who needs to see that some adults still choose what's right over what's profitable. For myself, because I can't look at that little girl and tell her that people can be bought. Some things matter more than money." What happened next unfolded slowly, realistically. Vaughn finally broke from his parents' control, restructured the family foundation against their wishes, and began genuinely investing in community programs, including funding a non-profit medical transportation service that helped families like Poppy's get to critical appointments. He and Beckett became unlikely friends, the billionaire and the mechanic, finding common ground in shared values rather than shared circumstances. Beckett's garage became a community hub, supported by grants that allowed him to help more families without sacrificing his business. And Poppy, through her experimental treatments, now accessible because of reliable transportation, began showing slow but steady improvement. She probably wouldn't ever walk normally, but she was thriving, bright, joyful, surrounded by adults who'd chosen her well-being over personal gain. 2 years later, Beckett and Vaughn sat in the garage after hours, sharing coffee, while Poppy, now 6 and even more talkative, showed them her latest drawings. "Do you ever regret it, turning down the money?" Vaughn asked, quietly. Beckett looked at Poppy's beaming face, thought about the dozens of families he'd helped with Vaughn's support, felt the satisfaction of work that actually mattered. "Not even for a second. You know what I regret? All those years I thought I couldn't make a difference because I didn't have enough money. Turns out the most valuable thing I had to give was always free, just giving a damn about people." Vaughn smiled. "You taught me that, you and Poppy. She said beauty exists in broken things if you look right. You both showed me that broken systems, broken families, broken assumptions, they can all be remade if someone's brave enough to choose differently. Because kindness isn't transactional. It's not something we do because we'll be rewarded or punished, and it can't be purchased or eliminated with money. Real kindness is choosing what's right when choosing what's profitable would be easier, standing up for the vulnerable even when it costs us, believing that human dignity matters more than any check someone might write. And sometimes refusing to be bought is the most valuable thing we can give."
If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.